Hey guys, Matthew, and recently on stream I've been trying out a bunch of different builds. And basically I've been trying to figure out what builds in a league start scenario with league start budget can basically destroy endgame content, and this is definitely a winner in my book. And what this is Reap. So if you look at Reap, it is a spell, it is physical, and it has AoE and duration tag. It has a portion of its damage which is dots, so you could play it as a damage over time build, but that's not what we're going to do. But the cool thing about this build, the skill, is that it has a base crit chance of 6%, which is really good. And it has effectiveness of added damage of 160%, which is also really good. But the cool thing about it is the blood charges. So if you read the skill, it says gain a blood charge if the skill hits enemies and none of them die. Lose a blood charge when an enemy dies while affected by the skill's debuff. Cost 20% more life per blood charge, and then deals 50% more damage. So that means that since you can have upwards of 5 blood charges at a time, this skill, for free, can deal 75% more damage, which instantly makes it a top tier contender when it comes to scaling its damage. Now the problem is, it'll also cost you 100% more life, which means that instead of 47 life, it'll cost you something like, almost 100 life per cast. Now, the cool thing about a miner is that we get to bypass cast speed, as I previously mentioned, right? So we get to have a lot more casts per second, but because it is a life-based skill and it costs life, it also reserves life, but we can take advantage of that, actually, which is what we are going to be doing in this build. Now, the thing is, however, blood charges don't work with mines, right? You cannot get blood charges when using a mine for Reap. So you have to get the blood charges elsewhere. So you've got a couple options, but it has to be you casting Reap to get the blood charges. Option number one would be to self-cast Reap 5 times before doing any sort of real effective damage to a boss. That's not exactly great, right? Sitting there for 5 hits, no good. So option number 2, which is my preferred method, is going to be to stick it in an Arcanist brand. By sticking it into an Arcanist brand, we can get the brand, which is considered you, to cast the skill over and over again, especially with faster casting, to where it will get you to 5 stacks extremely quickly. At the end of the video, there's going to be a Maven Ritz kill showcase, so if you want to see what it looks like, it's not all that clunky despite what it sounds like. And I'll also be showcasing just a regular T16 map because people always ask me how good these builds are at clearing. And this build, I think, is really good at clearing because of Exsanguinate swap. I'll talk about all that. Right. So that's how we're going to get the blood charges. Now, because of this, this does take up a full 4 link, which is kind of a big deal, right? It means that the build is definitely starved for sockets. And because I'm using the low life strategy that I mentioned in the previous video alongside a permanent Righteous Fire, as you can see, I could just turn on Righteous Fire. My hands are not on my keyboard. I'm not clicking any flask. I'm not detonating any mines. I'm literally just AFK, and I can literally permanently sustain Righteous Fire despite the fact that I only have 75 fire resistance. I'll talk about how I'm doing this in a second if you haven't seen my previous video. But because of that, I need to reserve some stuff on life. So I'm reserving Vitality, obviously, for the regen, Precision for some good old crit, and Clarity, which helps me be able to not run any sort of mana flask whatsoever, which is really nice. Otherwise, we were using a Flame Dash, Arcane Surge. I mean, Arcane Surge is a nice little buff. It's like 10% more damage. Assassin's Mark for base crit, because this build does lack base crit. Of course, we lost Diamond Flasks. Your critical strikes are lucky, so it's really hard to get capped nowadays without any sort of real investment. And, of course, without using increased critical strike support. Now, if I was to use increased critical strike support, that'd be a different story. But because I don't want to do that, because I think it's a wasted link, it's a little bit harder. So that's why we're using Assassin's Mark. And because there's no other better curse, really. Vulnerability is not great because bosses have 66% reduced curse effectiveness, which means that your vulnerability is only doing 1/3 of what it should be doing anyways. Otherwise, we're using Bear Trap as pretty much any trap or mine build. 25% increased damage taken is nuts. You just got to aim it properly, and your damage just goes through the roof. Steel Skin for a defensive portion of the build. Righteous Fire, because obviously Righteous Fire and Foul Righteous Fire for even more single target. Pride is our aura of choice. It is by far the best, especially if the monster stays within your aura range for 4 seconds and you get the maximum efficiency. War Banner. Now, I'm not actually using War Banner because on the budget setup, you don't have enough mana for it. Now, if you could stick these 3 in a 4-link, right? Because Spell Echo doesn't do anything. Stick these 3 in there and add like a level 3 Enlighten, you would be able to run War Banner. So that would be quite good. But otherwise, we are also running Skitterbots. Now, Skitterbots is by far the best. It's literally the best. Or you can run on a miner or a trapper, like ever, because of the way that it works, is really, really good. Okay, so that's pretty much the build. Now, there's going to be a POB in the description. Now, let's get into the actual showcase of what it looks like. Oh, actually, one thing I want to talk about before is going to be cluster jewels, because this build does use quite a few clusters. 1 large, 2 mediums, and 2 smalls. And instantly, when people hear cluster jewels, they think, oh no, it's going to be expensive, right? Oh, there's no way it's budget if it has clusters. And that's where you would be very, very wrong. These clusters are extremely, extremely cheap. But we have 1 full cluster. Now, the only notable that matters on the large is going to be Force Multiplier. But any other notable is also good. Force Multiplier is definitely by far the best, though. Your mediums are going to be Expert, Sabotage, and Guerrilla Tactics. They are not interchangeable for anything else. These are by far the best. And then we're going to use Surging Vitality. And this is why it looks like my life is breathing right now, right? I have Righteous Fire on, and my health is basically just going down a little bit and then going right back to full. A little bit right back to full. And the reason for that is because I'm running 2 Surging Vitalities, which are alternating, right? It says every 4 seconds regenerate 10% life over 1 second, but instead, because I'm running 2 of them, it's every 2 seconds regenerate 10% of life over 1 second. So what that means is it's basically giving me this effect of breathing on my life, where my life is going down 10% during 1 second, right? Because I don't have Surging Vitality, and then the second I get a pop of Surging Vitality for 1 second, so I go back up to full. And then it just does that over and over and over again, which means I literally don't have to invest anything else on this build in terms of regen other than the Fragile Growth, the Vitality, and 2 Surging Vitalities. No need for a flask spamming, no need for anything like that. I can just have Righteous Fire up at all times. And because what I'm taking advantage of is the fact that Reap is reserving life, right? When I precast all my 19 mines, you'll see that I'm actually reserving literally all my life, or half of my life, I should say. Which allows me to go into low life for Pain Attunement. So we're also taking advantage of that, which is where, all these things put together is coming out with to be a lot of damage. Now, we are using Fragile Regrowth stacks from Fragile Bloom, which is 7% of life regenerated per second, but it only works if you haven't been hit recently. So if I ever get hit, I'm going to lose these Fragile Bloom stacks, which means 7% regen just goes away from my build, which at that point, I wouldn't be able to sustain Righteous Fire with just, being AFK. But that's kind of when our Pyromaniac is going to kick in, and as long as we've detonated 5 mines, which is, a couple seconds of throwing mines every 4 seconds, right? As long as you're basically throwing a few mines here and there, you're going to get 10% regen from your Ascendancy, which basically completely replaces the need for Fragile Bloom. Now, I would recommend running both because it's a single jewel socket, and I would say it's really, really worth it because when they're up, especially with the Pyromaniac and everything else, you are quite tanky in terms of regen, and when it's not up, and let's say you can't throw mines because you're busy dodging or something like that, you need something to keep you alive. So I think the pair of using this plus that plus double surging and vitality is definitely a combination that I really, really like. All right, let's talk about the clusters real quick. So the large that I was talking about, right? The only thing you care about is Force Multiplier. But here's the thing: when you use it, right? When you roll this cluster, which is with Jagged Fossils, you're pretty much every time that you get Force Multiplier, you'll get it with something else, right? It might be Fierce Assault, it might be Battle Hardened, Exploit Weakness, or Master of Fundamentals. They're all about just as good. I mean, Exploit Weakness is by far the worst one here, but Iron Breaker is really good. Master of Fundamentals, really good. Battle Hardened is also really good. Fierce Assault is, like, okay. Like, no matter what you get alongside it, it's going to be good. And it's literally 7 Jagged Fossils. That's your entire investment on the cluster, and the base itself is a handful of Chaos. Because it's item level 50, right? You don't need any sort of item level 84, item level 75, nothing like that. It's literally item level 50. Not gonna lie, large clusters for physical are kind of busted. Alright, now we are moving on to the mediums. Now remember what I said? You want Expert, Sabotage, and Guerrilla Tactics. Well, check this out. If you want to alt spam Regal these bad boys, Guerrilla Tactics you will see every 8 alterations, which is literally nothing. And Expert Sabotage you will see every 15. So on average, what I would do is I would alt spam for Expert Sabotage. It would take on average, 15 alterations, and then I would Regal it, which is going to be about a 1 in 7 or something, 1 in 8, which is basically about 100 alterations per cluster. 7 regals. So even in a league start scenario, we're looking at about 10-15 C per cluster plus the base, which is like literally 1 C. Because again, Expert Sabotage is item level 1 and Guerrilla Tactics, Expert Sabotage is item level 50 and Guerrilla Tactics is item level 1. So extremely cheap. And then finally, we have Surging Vitality, small life clusters, which is also item level 1 and on average 21 alterations. So again, in a league start scenario, we're looking at a couple chaos. So even despite the fact that we are, rocking a full large cluster with, 2 double mediums and 2 smalls, it's literally free. It's just a handful of chaos for the entirety of what you're seeing on the top side of my tree. And there are no wasted nodes as the mana is not particularly bad because this is not a projectile, which means it doesn't benefit from projectile damage down here. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Now let's head over to the showcase. So I think what I'm going to start with is I'm just going to quickly showcase the clear, and then we're going to do the Maven's Ritz. So in terms of the clear, what's really important to note about this build is that you're not going to be clearing with Reap. Now you could if you wanted to. I can showcase it real quick. Let me go ahead and put this in actually. You could if you wanted to. Oh, this is going to be deadly. Porcupines. Porcupines is the one thing that you really can't do much about other than, sit in a ball and cry your eyes out, really. Especially because Reap doesn't have insane range. But yeah, like, it's okay, but it's not great, right? I would not recommend this. Also, it has pretty small range, right? It doesn't have, incredible coverage. It's not the worst, but it's not great. What I would recommend is you swap out Reap for Exsanguinate, and then you swap out Increased Crit Damage for Chain. And all of a sudden, this build becomes an absolute beast at clearing maps. You'll see that I basically don't even have to aim my mines. I literally just look at... I don't even have to look at my screen, and I'll basically clear the map without any issues, without any sort of... without even trying, really, because Exsanguinate has pretty insane mechanics on the clear, and it chains... right? Because we're using a chain support. So it's basically off-screening stuff to the point where you don't have to worry about anything. Now, of course, Porcupines is the one thing that you just can't do much about on a physical build. There is no Shatter, there is no Destroy, and we are fairly squishy. Now, what I would do personally in order to have a better time in that specific map is I would turn off all of my auras that are currently costing me life, right? So I would turn off Clarity, turn off Precision, turn off Vitality, and all of a sudden my life pool would be a lot more reasonable to where when I do, face tank some Porcupines, as long as I have my flasks up, my Jade Flask, my Quartz Flask, as long as I get my blind off, I should be okay to be able to just face tank the whole thing, especially if Steel Skin is on. Now, the thing is, when you activate those auras, yes, they are really beneficial to the build, but they also, they're taking away 1,000 life from your health pool. They're taking away 25% of your HP, which is not a problem when it comes to bossing because your biggest defensive mechanic is dodge, right? Not getting hits. But for mapping, it's not the case. Now, anything that's not Porcupines, you'll be fine. Legion, it can annihilate Legions. Breaches, absolutely easy. Blights, right? It has plenty of damage to murder Blights as well, which is really nice. But now that I quickly showcased a horrible showcase of mapping, let's go ahead and jump into the actual Maven so I can showcase how this build works in terms of single target with the blood charges and all that. So what I'll do is I'll activate my Righteous Fire. I'll walk up to the boss, and then all I have to do is throw my Arcanist Brand, my Bear Trap, Assassin's Mark, and then I just let it rip. And you'll see the damage is pretty nuts. So let's go ahead and let her blink first, because otherwise I'll just be wasting my stuff. Put the brand down for blood charges, put that, curse her. Then we're going to put all our mines down, and yeah, she's dead. That's it. That's Maven. So the same thing could be done in something like the Feared. This build can do the Feared. This build will do the Feared. Uber Ziri, it's a minor build, which means it doesn't get any issues with Reflect. So that's really good. We're not flask spamming, which means, you know, since we're not spamming the life flask to stay alive, because of a regen is plenty to keep us going with Righteous Fire. It makes it for a very comfy playstyle, and with Exsanguinate as the skill of choice for the actual mapping portion, it is very, very easy. So again, we're gonna put our debuffs down. Let's do this. Oh, so I kind of messed up there.
Just need a moment to catch my breath.
Definitely not gonna want to face tank the Cascade of Pain. That's gonna hurt a little bit. Oh, she's basically dead. I didn't realize she had 1 HP the whole time. I do have Culling Strike because of my Anoint, which is something which is really, really nice. But mines cannot proc Culling Strike, which means that I can only get the Culling Strike off with the Arcanist brand, which is something that is slightly annoying sometimes. But, you know, not the end of the world. So, make sure that we don't face tank anything. Again, our biggest defense really is just not getting hits. But as you can see, we were able to just completely instant phase her. We just skipped the memory phase entirely. No problem there. The damage is really, really, really high for what it is. Especially considering the budget, right? We are still rocking extremely budget setup right now. There's not a single item in my build that would be expensive. Like, literally nothing. The clusters are cheap. The tabula is cheap, obviously. The Mark of the Shaper in a League Start scenario, I suppose, could be a little bit expensive. What the heck was that? Looks like there was some debris from the bosses. Could be a little bit expensive for the Mark of the Shaper, but honestly, nothing to write home about. Oh, it looks like I hit the degen, so that's a little bit annoying. Good thing I don't have Righteous Fire running at the moment. So let's see if my memory will hold up for this memory game. 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1. Alrighty. So we're gonna let her, you know, go in on us. TP, so we can just annihilate her. Boom, boom, boom. Dodge that. And another Cascade of Pain, so we're gonna have to be worried about that. Alright. Boom, boom, boom. And that should be the end of the fight right about now. And that's it. That's the build. I mean, look. Absolutely annihilates Maven on a budget which is really, really cheap. In a League Start scenario, let's just say Cold Iron points are half an X each. We're looking at an X right there. Maybe an X and a half for the Tabula. Oh god, shut up, guy. I don't want to hear you. An X and a half, an X and X and a half for the Tabula. Crappy, rare, couple chaos, couple chaos, couple chaos. One thing that is kind of important to get is a corruption of spell critical strike chance on your gloves. That being said, Hands of the High Templars with this corruption, with nothing else, are extremely, extremely common and not that expensive. Maybe an Exalt. And this is fairly endgame. Like, you don't need that for the build. It's just, it will help your critical strike chance because, as I mentioned previously, you do have a little bit of issues with crits. But the rest is really just regular rares, life and res, bit of attributes here and there. And in terms of the jewels, there is also nothing expensive here. Life, mind throwing speed, and then attributes or resistances if you're missing them. We are going to help Alira for this build because it makes it easier to gear because of the 15 all-res. But realistically, there are so many open slots for rares that you don't need to help Alira. You could instead get the 2 passives and just like slap on an extra jewel socket, for example, right? Like this one that I haven't gotten or this one that I haven't gotten. As I already mentioned, we get Marked for Death for the Anoint, which is going to give us Culling Strike, but you'll all see that in the POB, which is down in the description. Before I go, as always, I want to say massive, massive thank you to my supporters, Kat, Alex, Brandon, Nick, the other Alex, Flame Scorpion, Neroth, Grimoire, the Great Master, Johnny, Thomas Mass, Reese, Tim, Axel, Road to Millions, Atticus, Scott, Stan, Zarashi, welcome back, Wolverine, Ronald, Kevin, the third Alex, Bitizen, and Mercury, as well as, of course, anybody else who has supported me in the past and anybody else who wishes to remain anonymous. Now, this is a bit of a clunky build, but if you get the hang of it, it is really an insane build, and especially in a League Start scenario. And by the way, not a single person on PoE Ninja is currently playing this build. Not a single person. So the odds of this getting nerfed is basically 0%, and it doesn't abuse any sort of broken mechanics, no Hydrosphere, no no Sniper's Mark, no sort of chaining abuse, no sort of brittle abuse. It is a very basic build. So I think that is completely safe of any sort of nerfs. Matter of fact, it might get buffed. Anyways, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.